Repeated sips of coke, not a great slug, but sending off in the real world. So I don't like lots of alcohol. I don't like lots of oak because it hides the great taste and the developed, all of the taste of wine. And certain wines I don't like, but most wines I definitely do.
So what's the most wrong-headed wine you've ever come across?
Oh God, well, I guess I tasted some wines that I thought were terrible in the first place, and then they've grown on me later. In the case of certain Australian Shiraz, for example, I thought, oh, no thanks. And then going on with it, I thought, no, there's a little in there that I hadn't really noticed the first time round. So I think it's terribly important not to just sniff, spit, which is how most wines, actually, I hate to tell you, are judged and bought because wine buyers have to get through a whole lot of wine. So you can't form a proper opinion. You've got to see the wine at some length. At least I have to revisit it, have to think about it, preferably have it with a wheel, and then I begin to understand it.
So what about the sort of blind tastings that magazines run on? Magazines do it because readers seem to like them, but it's sit and spit and sit and spit and forming a fairly instant judgment. What's the alternative to that?
Well, that's describing exactly why I avoid them if I possibly can. I try to sneak a look at the label, don't you?
Well, somebody thinks all that work, isn't it? What in your career has been the best period for wine and what was the worst period for wine?
I think I have been able to enjoy something about wine from most periods. Because after all, what else is there to drink? You know, there are terrible vintages which you learn to avoid. And there have been some producers who managed to do something wonderful, even in bad vintages. So it's the vintages, of course, don't rise therefore, but so is the producer. And you get to learn who are the people who please your palate. And that's why actually I have become rather conservative. I started very conservative. Now I'm very, very, very conservative. In the sense that there are certain wines I really know and I can go on drinking however often I can. And there was a period in my life when I was a great explorer. It was in the 1970s. Suddenly, with Tony Lathwaite just encouraging me, I traveled all over the place. I made my first visit to Australia, my second visit to California, and I whizzed around the world. And went to Chile, and I was billed as the chap who was discovering new wine countries or even continents. Because I'm interested in them, and I'm certainly willing to write about them. So that was a very exploratory period in the 1970s. And of course, I was doing the world atlas of wine. So I had to whiz around, and I had to get to know places in real detail. Because maps are very, very demanding. The days are gone by when you could produce a map and just write over some part of here being dragons. But people want to know what is there. They want to know about the B roads as well as the A roads. So I had to get very close to the subject. And doing the world atlas of wine was the biggest. It taught me almost everything I know. The groundwork was the maps.
And the maps are brilliant. And I remember driving around Bordeaux going to various chateaus, and the atlas was the only one that actually told you where the entrance to the chateau was. Otherwise you try to run acres trying to find the entrance. The atlas simply told you where the entrance was. The advent of better winemaking, new world, if you want to call it that, wine regions with less vintage variation have rather meant that off vintages are desperately unfashionable. And yet they can have a charm if they're not absolutely dreadful.
Oh, I agree. I was born in an off-vintage. As I said, vintages are the second most important thing after the maker of the wine. But with modern wine, so much, most of it, 99% is industrial. And those of us who love wine and are really, really enjoying it and thinking about it, know perfectly well that it's an intimate subject. It is about a particular farmer, a particular field, a particular time. And it's that particularity, actually, that really gets me, that brought me into the subject. You're very close to an individual and his efforts and his successes and his failures. And that is overriding to me. It's a very intimate subject, and globalization and industry has not done it much good.
You're absolutely right, and most wine is industrial and therefore not very interesting. But, you know, if you look at the stories behind wines and you meet the people, and then you taste a range of wines blind, it's sometimes very hard to correlate the two, because the wines you want to stand out are not the ones that do stand out very often.
Well, when you talk about score, you lose me completely. I am simply incapable of tasting this wine and saying it's a 94 or 96 or maybe a 71. I mean, I first met wine scores with my New York publisher, Peter Schwayne, who was also, and this is the proudest moment in my writing life, he was also P.G. Woodhouse's publisher. And he showed me a manuscript. This is great, it's 1978, I think. And he said, "You want to think of this?" And I thought, tasting notes, I thought, well, fantastic. Really vital and full of energy and quite perceptive and so on. And then down the margin, it said the vintage, and there was a number. And I said, "What's the other number?" He said, "That's a score." I said, "Well, score, what do you mean?" Well, this was Robert Parker's first manuscript. And so I met the master from Baltimore for the first time and buy his manuscript. And I said, "Well, how does it score? What does it mean? Is it just a matter of preference?" And he slightly preferred one wine to another, so he gives it 96 rather than 95. And that's still the question in my head. I cannot get anything objective about scoring, so I simply don't score.
I remember some years ago, quite a lot of years ago, going through some auction catalogues, and an awful lots of 11 bottles of Napa Cabernet being put up for sale. So what was going on there, I do not know, but it was the height of the Parker era. Yes. You've got some rather good anecdotes in your memoirs about gardens occasionally. There was the cutting of the Vieille Française vine that you took from Bollinger, which you planted at the same war. What happened to that when you moved?
Oh, now those cuttings were around. It was 1970 that Bollinger launched the Vieille Française, and the point of this was that this was Pinot Noir from a vineyard at High, where they are, which had survived phylloxera. I never knew how, but these were very old devices, and they had grown. There was something in the soil that the plant didn't like. Nobody understood it, but it was true. So from that, they made, and still make a wine. You know, very dense, important tasting, Vieille Française. So when I was there, they launched it, and also Lucy and I went over. We tasted, oh yes, this is becoming a story. Because in the cellar at Bollinger, they had bottles of 1890 or something, and Latache, and wines like this, which they had swapped. They swapped barrels. So these were claret and burgundy in champagne bottles, bottled by Voyager. And we tasted, and they were all right. They were but, so to finish the story, I planted this vine in the wall garden at our own house in Essex called and I didn't want to, it was no use to me as a wine vine, so I grew it up a pergola. It grew absolutely massive. It's still there to this day. And I was talking to some friends, winemaking friends, and I said, I've got some of the VAV process. Would you like cuttings? Yes. So there are now cuttings distributed here and there. The first went to Bar and Lathwaite, actually, so it was mine, and I'm now growing it out. My first vineyard near Henley on Thames, and they went to Subaru, so they're now will be making his wonderful, what do you call it, Subaru South Downs down near Worthing, and I dare say the nuisance will spread further.
Well, I think it might. And what about the rooms that you nicked from Grand Prix Lacoste?
Well, I don't know if you know Grand Prix Lacoste. It's one of the absolute banker Pauillac chateaus. I think it's only a fifth grade. But anyway, it's not grand, it's just good. And it lies inland in the Medlock Rock, near the river where all the best wines are supposed to come from. And this wine is an absolute banker. I buy almost every vintage. And I was exploring the place. There was nobody living there at the time. Now the Borry family are there, but it was rather run down, and it had a walled garden. And I love gardens, especially walled gardens, lots of potager and all that. And I spotted a vine, a rose on the wall, which to me was the nearest thing to a blue rose I'd seen. Although there is no such thing as a blue rose. So I took a cutting. Is that all right? Took it home. We grew it on the wall at Sailing Hall, and I didn't know what it was, so I called it Grand Prix Lacoste. Later on, they found that it picked up a rather disgraceful German name, which escapes me a little bit.
Probably just as well. Another story you tell us of tasting Hardy Rodenstock wines. Yes. Hardy Rodenstock, of course, was renowned for doing tastings of extremely old and rare bottles, incredibly old and rare bottles. And when I say incredibly, I mean literally incredibly, because he was later found to be a fraudster. And nobody never knew where he got his wines from, but afterwards we could begin to imagine. How many of those wines you tasted were fake, do you think?
I don't think much went to one of his tastings. I remember it was in Munich, and Michael Broadbent and I went together. I think Michael went to all of them. He was, after all, second-hand wine dealer, wasn't he? And you looked at the list and you thought, well, it starts with a double magnum of Petrus 21. Hang on. That seems improbable. They didn't have double magnums. And it went on like that. Some of the wines were absolutely marvellous. And I thought, I don't know what I'm drinking, but it's wonderful wine. There were no nuts in that tasting, but neither were there many genuine wines. I think that the thing I remember most of all was his range of Chateau Yquem, which went back, if I remember rightly, to the 1811. And I really learned something from this, because we had Yquem right through the 19th century. And there was one that absolutely stuck in my mind. It was 1847, I think. And I thought, this is the most fabulous wine I can imagine tasting. And everyone agreed. And that was that for the other wines. So I said, hang on. Listen, anybody here, given 1811 or 1853 or any of those wines, would have made an evening for anybody. It was on its own. It did not need to be compared with other wines. And this is a point I'm very strong on. Wines are made to be enjoyed with food or on their own, and they're not meant to be enjoyed with other wines. That is why massive tastings like this, they may big up some wine, but they bury the rest, and that's such a shame. I always think when people say, the best wine, comparisons are odious, are they not? The best wine dismisses the other wines, however good they are, however different they are, and the joy of wine lies in the differences.
Yes, and probably those tastings were more intended to pick up their party written stuff than they were to pick up any of the wines. What is the oldest wine you've tasted?
Today. No, this is a question I've been asked before. Well, to put this in context, William Shakespeare, the dramatist, was born in, if I've got this right, 1564. And now, by that time, the wine I'm talking about would have been 24 years old, and for German wine, therefore, pretty ready to drink. Except that 400 and something years later, it was still going strong. It was one of the wonders. 1540, it was a Stein wine, which means that it came from Würzburg, the river Main, from the Stein vineyard, which is always been considered one of the best. It slopes down really steep ridges of the town. It was owned by the most important establishments in Würzburg, and they had huge cellars. In particular, there was the Burgerspital, which is the sort of bourgeois headquarters of the town. This wine was still alive. 1540 was still alive. Now, if it, 400 and however many years later, if it had not been alive, it would be unbreakable. It would have not, it would have burst with vinegar, it would have been rotting, it would be disgusting. But I was very young at the time, so I wasn't as old as you might think. It was, there were about 12 of us when the bottle was opened. I remember saying that it was at Elman's in Mayfair. And we gave it a little sip each and I tasted it. It was sweet, it was distinctive, it was perfumed, it was totally Madeiraized. If you tasted close to anything was Madeira. There was something German about it, I thought. And I thought to myself, this is unbelievable. I have in my mouth something that was ripened by the summer sun of 1540, which is a very famous hot vintage. I thought, that's incredible. Only wine can live like that.
And it is the stories behind wine that make it magical. Your book is full of stories, and I recommend it highly. It is extremely entertaining, as you, I guess. When you got behind Academy of Art Library with Stephen Sparrow, what was your thinking? Was it to present the stories of wine, to inform people, to pass on knowledge, or what?
Well, the concept was marvelous, and I think it was first mooted by Stephen Sparrow at a lunch that he and Ben Hawkins, who is here tonight, and I had at Brooks's Club. And Stephen was talking about old wine writing, and so were we. I mean, the point was that, okay, you've got the latest, the news on the latest vintages, and some brilliant writing. But what about all the other people who've been appreciating wine and writing about it for centuries? And a lot of it is good stuff. So the idea came about that this new publisher, the Academy du Vin was the name of Stephen's establishment when he was a wine merchant in Paris, and had the revolutionary idea of teaching the French about wine. An Englishman teaching the French about wine. So Academy du Vin is there originally to reprint books that have been out of print for a long time, and also to bring on the very best writing of our wines now. And it's done a beautiful job. The wine, the books are beautifully produced, as probably you all know. And it's another aspect of wine available to people who dearly love it, as many of us do.
And wine publishing, as those of us who try and write wine books know, is actually very difficult because people don't buy wine books. But I hope that will change tonight. Tell me about the genesis of the pocketbook, in which I'm heavily involved.
Margaret, you are pocket. Now that came about because James Mitchell was my original publisher. Mitchell Beasley was his company, and we'd been at Cambridge together. We were sparking young men, I had no doubt, and together we just produced the World Ends of Wine, which is a war, as you know. And James came to stay with Julie and me one weekend in the country, and over breakfast, he said, you know, all that anybody really needs to know about wine could go into a little thing like this. He produced his pocket diary, you see. And I said, oh, brainwave, if only. He said, what are you doing? He said, you've got the World Ends of Wine fresh in your head. Sit down and write the essentials, just 2 lines on each. And I thought, great, I'll do that. And I did. And it came out in 1978, rather elegantly produced, I think. This was the format. The trouble was that a year later he said, now what about the next edition? And I said, oh, what? I've got to do it yet. So in the end, before Margaret, bless him, came to my rescue, I did it done it 44 times. This actually, I want to show you, is the way it first appeared. There was no jacket. It was a nice little leather job, fur leather. And I don't have the first edition. So if anybody, or anybody knows anybody who's got the first edition, I wish they'd come and see me behind the gym afterwards.
I don't think anybody's old enough. So spacious, like white space, it's amazing. Is there any wine country in the world that you haven't been to?
I'm sure, because they grow new ones all the time. I mean, Jancis comes up with a new country every week.
But where do you like to go to most?
Where do I like to go to? Well, as a visitor, I think Germany is so underrated. It has some of the most beautiful wine regions. I mean, the Moselle above all. It has some of the most lovely wines. Huge passionate fan of Riesling. And it has some of the most hospitable, lovely wine growers who mostly speak English, thank God. And then each one has got a wonderful range of wines to show you. You know, in France, they say, right, here is the new vintage. And it's interesting, is what you say. In Germany, they say, but then my cabinets, my traders, and you've got to see my houses, and then I've got to talk and beer houses. And you can go on far into the night, but in one cellar. It's a lovely place to go, and very happy, although I still don't speak German, sad to say, they come to my rescue.
And the foods are very versatile, wines are very versatile with food. You've talked about wine with food briefly tonight. Why is it that so many chefs don't care about wine, do you think?
It's a fast ball. Have we got a chef in the room? I'll have to speak for you then, I'm sorry. I think a lot of chefs do care about wine, but they're thirsty people, and they don't. It's a thirsty job. And they very rarely open particularly good or interesting bottles of wine. Now, that's my impression. They're too busy doing the food. And in any case, if you have a wonderful dish and some great, famous, highly expensive wine with it, which gets the priority? Because it's extremely unlikely that the taste of one is going to enhance the taste of the other. We're going to have two things to think about, which is not great. Therefore, I mean, my philosophy in restaurants is to go for something that I think will be decent but predictable and not too expensive. The place to drink your top wines, if you have, is at home. Then you're in total control. I would never buy a top wine in a restaurant, because think of the markup.
What would be, so what wine might you be drinking on a Saturday night at home? A mature red Bordeaux? What food would you put with that?
Saturday night, where?
Well, it could be Sunday lunch or it could be Monday night.
We do drink a lot of claret. And I still love the word claret. I mean, it is red Bordeaux, but claret explains just the kind of clear, slight, sort of fresh cutting wine that it ought to be. You know, you can stuff it full of oak and overripen the grapes and produce something that'll win you 90 points. But claret is built to be, intended to be, invented to be a wonderful drink with food. And you don't have to get too fussy about the food. Obviously, red meat and all that. So claret is or should be refreshing, and therefore a good drink with food. And I've got a particular attachment to champagne, so it's not difficult to work out what happens in the Johnson household.
Some of the worst matches of wine and food I've had have been at top restaurants, it's true, when exactly as you say, the chef cooks his signature dishes and says with the wine, and you could see a car crash down, and it comes. But there we are.
But have you ever been to the French Laundry in the Napa Valley?
Yes.
Well, you have to book a year and a half in advance to get into the French Laundry. And the cooking is absolutely fantastic. There's a chap appears at your table, wringing his hands and saying, I'm aware, I'm taking care of you tonight. And then he gives you this wine list, which is like a telephone directory. And you think, what am I going to do? I've got an hour and a half before they kick me out. I can't possibly read even the headlines in this great volume. So I said, well, I can give you the short list if there is one. Well, I have the house wine. You know, somehow the choice of the elaborate choice of brand wines in restaurants doesn't work for me. And okay, I could go online and read their wine list if I had the time. And I don't, in other words, buy super special wines in restaurants.
That's probably a very good plan. Adam would probably think that everybody should buy super special wines everywhere. How are we doing on that? One more minute. What should we talk about for one more minute?
Well, we've done the booking one. Let's talk about my other passion in life, if we may. Because what I really do in life is I garden. I'm a passionate gardener. I've always had the trees my special subject, so I'll bit on trees anytime you like. But when James Mitchell asked me after the success of the World Atlas Prize, 40-something years ago, he said, okay, so what's next? And I said, trees. And he said, gee, that's a good idea.
Let's go to the cheese makers.
I said, tea, I'm trying to help. That's not a consumer subject. Anyway, I insisted, and I wrote this book on trees, which came out in a big book, same format as the Atlas, and it was, I have to say, it was a huge success, because it took a new, not a botanical approach to trees, just an appreciative approach to trees. And it's still in print, one visual edition or another, many, many years later. And it took me into the second edition of it, the more recent edition, is called Trees, a Journey Through Forests, Woods and Gardens. And that is what it's about. Trees and forests are completely different from trees and gardens. They're there for a different reason, different kinds of trees and so on. There are so many. I've been called an encyclopedist quite recently. And why is that? Because I love the differences between things. I'm kind of keen on the alphabet too. If you start a day and go to Z, you can find a place where everything's comes.
In your garden at Saving, you had a place where everything was colossal. Do you miss it?
Yes, but we're very, very lucky. I made an arboretum, which sounds grand, but the whole place was 12 acres. But I fitted in a lot of trees, and particularly rare trees and beautiful trees. And our successor, the current owner, is as crazy about trees as I am. He also. So you believe it or not, we send each other emails quoting Latin names to trees.
And what's he doing with your wine cellar?
There's a lot of room in that cellar. No, he happens by some other crazy chance to be on my merchant. He's got.
Anybody we know?
Possibly not. No, he's not the named wine merchant. He works actually for Bordeaux Index. So he deals.
So he can afford it.
So he deals in rather grand. He deals in rather grand wines, like somebody else who's been at
I think that's all we've got time for. Thank you very much. It was.
We've time for a couple of questions from the floor, which I think is further away from me. Would a couple of people like to ask? Will? Maybe.
Hi, everyone. Good evening. Hugh, you briefly mentioned German wines are underrated.
German wines being underrated?
Yeah, German wines are very underrated in the UK, which I believe that.
It actually made me think about Swiss wines. I say that because I'm flying for the first time since February 2020 to Switzerland next week. Having been to Switzerland 5 times, I won't try a single Swiss wine. I don't understand why. But the only Swiss wine I've seen in London was £140 bottle in a wine version, which is not funny about. Can you tell us anything about Swiss wines? Why don't we know? I like those.
Great question, particularly because the expert is sitting on the road, in the room behind it. Chandra advises me on Swiss wines. She advises Swiss Airways, if that's Swiss Airways, that still exists. Not many bands like that do. And I agree with you, but finding them here, everyone makes a remark. Why are they so expensive? they're not famous, so why are they expensive? And that starts another argument about favour of price. One or two. But there we are.
Future for writing journalism, what do you see the future being?
The future of my journalism, what do you see the
Future.
future?
Sorry, Tom.
Well, gosh, that's a terribly good question. I read recently in somebody's blog a little essay called "What Makes a Good Wine Writer," and it listed a whole lot of qualifications, like knowing everything about everything. But what the main point was that a writer is a writer. A good writer can get you interested just by being a good writer. And if you can't write well, don't bother to write about wine, because wine is an extremely difficult thing to write about.
And if I can chip in there, I think one of the most overused words in wine writing is the word I. It doesn't have to be about you, it's about what you're talking about.
Thank you so much, Margaret. That was wonderful. Would you like to come and join us for the wine? Will you be able to ask a question? Is that what you were saying?
Yeah, I think it's very good. Well, I don't want to hold things up, but in the last few years, things have generally got a lot hotter. And I just want to know if you notice some regions where the wines repair no relation to what they did a few years ago.
Such as England, for example.
Whereas, like,
Yeah. England is a great example of that. I read somewhere that they haven't had a bad vintage in Germany for 34 years. Well, they used to be every other year. So yes, I mean, the marginal wine producing regions, the north and south, have been beneficiaries of global warming. In warm places, there are serious concerns that grapes will overripe. They won't wait the necessary time for the whole maturity of the entire berry, and they could be ruined. For example, one of the people most interested in this is Miguel Torres in Catalonia. He has already bought and is planting vineyards at a higher altitude. He's advancing up into the foothills of the Pyrenees because he's really worried.
Gentlemen, you want to taste and have a discussion around wines? What do you know?
Some wine and art.
When we started this exercise, I think only wanted to taste 4 wines, and we've got 6. We're starting with a leg down. But I just wanted to say a few words before we actually get on to tasting, because there's nothing worse than watching, let alone listening, to 2 people tasting wines that are nowhere near, and will have to be at least 20 minute patience before you are there. But I grew up in the very long shadow of Hugh, and I admired and adored him from a very, very early age. And I was picking up what Margaret was saying about writing, what makes a great writer. I think some people refer to your sleek prose, which I think is, with sleek, I would think of things like sort of Bugattis or Aston Martins or something exotic, the most beautiful, beautiful coachwork. But I could listen to you all day, all night, and I could read you all day, all night. And that's something that I can't really say about any other wine writer, in my experience, on wine. I admire so many of them, and so many of them are brilliant, but he conjures up an image that few people touch. which I think is wonderful. And actually, I wanted to ask you before we started, is wine for you about, and you touched on it earlier, about a sense of a person or a sense of a place?
I think that the person, the place, and the time are the elements, and the great variety, of course, are the elements that make wine. And people talk wine, a lot of people talk or write about wine that has a sense of place. I'm not quite sure if I understand what that means to you.
I sort of can. I mean, I think that if you take at the extreme level, some through red bag vineyard, you know exactly where it is, you know where it is in relation to others, and why it's different, or why you think it's different because of this aspect of that slope and all that sort of stuff. And the beauty of a vineyard, I mean, sometimes the most brilliant wines come from the most boring vineyards, don't they? It's sort of flat and dull and featureless. And some of the most beautiful countryside produces some of the least distinguished wines. I've never understood that. So I see place, yeah. But a person, the older I get, it's more about people. I drink for the person.
Yeah, because you're going to get into a very special case. I mean, wine are the most beautiful wine maps about the Côte d'Or because of the degree of detail. And why is this degree of detail? Because it's been going on for 400 years, and people have learnt what a particular bit of ground can do. You can't learn that straight away. You find somebody in the Napa Valley saying, oh, Down Creek is there, has these particular qualities, but they've tasted 10, 20 vintages of it. I'm not sure that I'm going to find that sense of place, but sense of place can be on a much broader scale than that. You could say that this wine tastes to me as though it comes from a green hillside or a baking plain or something like that. That is also a sense of place.
Yeah, and of course one of the greatest of all red wines, Grange, comes from so many disparate places. You couldn't pin it on So that takes us neatly on to, I'm sorry, this is awful. I've never done a tasting. Have you ever done a tasting in which we're allowed to taste and for that long?
You're going to get over really quickly.
Okay, so tell us about Paul Roger.
All right, well, anyone here that doesn't find Paul Roger one of the most immediately pleasing, satisfying drinks, well, there you are. You've got it, haven't you? That's our story. Julie and I went there about 3 weeks ago. We visited this place, and I suddenly realized that it had been my go-to, expression, most familiar champagne for 60-something years. I started drinking it when I was a student at Cambridge, and I have seen no reason to depart from this habit. Funny enough, it was Monsieur Roger who first ever Paul started his champagne house in about 1830. Oh, bless you. And he decided at the beginning he was going to sell it to the English. Beginning of the Victorian age, lots of money in England. He thought, there's suckers over there, they'll buy it. And it's always been a great success. Cleverly aimed it at the professional classes, particularly the military. You'll find regiments have got particular attachments to poetry. So it has that aura for me, as well as being a drink I could drink any time of day or night. To describe it now, that's you'll never go to describe it because
Yeah, I'm a child. I love the label. I think poverty is if you like the sort of sexier, more sort of Chardonnay-based style, I think it's one of the great houses. It's also a family house, and so there's a sense of person, which I love, and it's relatively small, because a grown market greater reputation but smaller in production compared to others, and I love that. I'm not necessarily authority, but probably not because you don't represent it. But I think it's another one. And the white label, which they didn't call white label anymore for some reason. I love that.
Well, that's funny because the expression white fallout in London or in England is familiar to many champagne lovers, and yet, for some reason, we had an argument with the president of the company. I said, why don't you call me white fallout? That's the name that everybody knows. He said, no, it's Brut Reserve. Well, I said, all the champagnes are Brut Reserve.
This moves swiftly on. I'm not nervous with this. Okay, the first still white wine is a Macalese, which was a vineyard bought and you could say almost created by somebody we both knew and adored, and Claude Leflaive of the men Leflaive, who died too young, and was one of the great figures in Beckett, the wine, and a dear and another friend. And we used to speak because she was a very mischievous person. We used to go and have drinks and nasty meal at the Captain Island, Beckett Station, because they didn't recognise her there. And that was lovely. And quite often you'd have to go down, and she called it Pear or Pear. But here it is, your thoughts.
Well, this is a micron. A micron is, in everybody's sort of estimation, a second class after the Côte d'Or, obviously, in Burgundy. So you don't have that greatest expectations from anyone from micron, even from village of Beckett. And then you taste it and you're quite, at least I'm quite convinced that it comes from Côte d'Or. So it is that good. But that sort of had this gift at one time, not long before she died. She started to experiment with the élevage, bringing up the wines from completely different parts of France. And we once had a muscadet with her label on it. And hell's bells. It was just a different class. And somebody who thoroughly understood the personality of a wine and what to do to bring it out. And that is the art of élevage, and that is what wine growers and indeed merchants do.
It was rather unfortunately named company, they called it Clack. after Claude and Didier Bourguignon, who were their advisors on dynamics, and Claude Clack. And I came to believe that that was intellectually stimulating, but commercially not a lovely wine. So our next pair, is highly relevant, and the little story that I had you had.
Well, it's a big jump. Chardonnay is universal, everyone has a curve. And California was a pioneer in Chardonnay in the New World, but they've had an awful job finding the right place to grow it. And this was a challenge that Auvergne of the Loire you felt challenged by it. But I don't know a lot about the history of how it started, and I know Mr. Hyde, so as in Jekyll,
Yeah, and it's Rick Hyde, I think, now, and the family, the Hyde family are connected with Pamela Riviere, and so it's a tiny little sort of family operation, and Aubert is very discreet about it. Again, the production is tiny, it's Carneros, it's Napa, very cool climate, and these wonderful coastal winds, and so it just lifts it, and if you're looking for the sort of big, blousy, blustery style, you won't find it here. It's got a lightness of touch to that natural richness, which I think is quite special. But hey, these guys are inside later.
And this is the first time I've ever tasted this very nice day. And if you're looking for something sort of prickly in California, go elsewhere, because this has a lovely, delicate balance with the right amount of acidity, which in modern wine parlance for some reason is called minerality. I don't know where the minerals come in.
This evening has been like being humbled by a combination of Margaret Brad and Hugh Johnson. I can tell you, I keep on trying not to use the word I. The entire issue. I is where they were apologize.
That's a lovely one. I mean, you're going to enjoy this chapter. I do it in some way, yeah.
And I want to stress, I always think that that's it, it's that even the greatest white wines are merely an introduction to a good bread. That's their own life, it's the sort of delicate gate for a great bread. But then you can keep speaking about Germany for quite a long time, so I'm just being bold. I'll give quiet. But here, Hugh's beloved claret, and we were talking earlier about the fact that this region, maligned for so long, was famous 1,000 years before Medoc was raided by the Dutch in the 17th century. This is the Brooklyn War, and renowned throughout the world, first planted by the Romans as so they were. I think smart people in Bordeaux, not just in Bordeaux, in other great wine producing areas, look to history to teach them where they should be looking to the future. So in a sense, it's there it is. So François Michelet is the Côte d'Or, looks rather wistfully across the Gironde estuary towards Margate, and it is apart, and that stretch of water divides it.
Well, I think writers and world amateurs of wine tend to be rather dismissive about the parts of Bordeaux that aren't on their back or the right back, and not to take seriously the wines from Bourgogne and other parts of the south, which make most of Bordeaux. The total production of Bordeaux is vast, and most of it comes from places which are not privileged famous areas. So, this to me, this is a new wine to me. I didn't know the Chateau, and a very rarely tasted Côte d'Or, seriously, absolutely. This is a stunning wine, absolutely stunning. I mean, it's clearly made by somebody who's aspiring, is hard of a word. I mean, it is made in the manner of a great wine. The élevage of this has been absolutely pinpoint perfect. That means the length of time it's spent in barrel and every other aspect of its making. It has quality written all over. And a character that is slightly different. I don't think I ever thought it came from Medoc. I'd been damn sure it doesn't come from San Miguel, so but it landed in the middle.
Which is a very, very good description. Again, it's a tiny producer. This is a rock decor from the Book of Law. And from a happy vintage, 2014 was just a nice year. It's not a great year, but it's a beautiful wine, and it's a wine that people drink and over the next 20 years. And then finally, a wine from somebody quite another person close to our hearts, or indirectly close to our hearts, because this, of course, is made and presented by the nephew of a great friend of ours, Peter Vindigiers, and Peter Sissek. This wine comes from in the Ribera del Duero. And I remember during Cambridge, Hugh and I and Peter had this sort of fireside chat, remember, about Peter's book, also published by Cambridge, Viking Green Out, was a wonderful book. And we had a sort of three-way conversation, Peter in Sicily by a sort of fireside, and that was a real fire. And you and I huddled in a rather less sort of salubrious part of the United Kingdom. I was in London in some basement, yeah, whatever. And there we did this thing. Anyway, this is side, reverted, largely but not completely temporarily agreement. And a nice story because it's Peter Sisek, who of course produces Vineyard Drinkers, which became a little bit of a legend back in the 90s, and now is acknowledged as one of the great red wines of the world. And this is his way of giving back to the area that made him famous by. He contracts growers, buys tiny little parcels of grapes, which have to be either organic or biodynamically cultivated. He pays super premium prices to encourage the local farmers to maintain the quality and the age of their vineyards rather than run them up. And it's a lovely story. That's the sort of intellectual side. But the wine is,
Well, recognise high gloss. This is a highly polished wine, which doesn't actually have hot Spain written all over it at all. Now, I would hesitate to say, I'm not sure that I would have realised it was Spanish without the briefing I've had. It's just a beautifully made wine, very full, satisfying red, with that sort of message that great reds have, which is refreshment inside satisfaction. I can't put it better than that. But I will say that you mentioned Peter Vinding and his book, and I would just say somebody was interested in the evolution of modern wine and a really intelligent mind, scientific mind applied to it from a man who is a Danish aristocrat. He's completely independent of all our sort of perceived perceptions of anything. He's got his own ideas, which include scientific background, but that's not all. So wherever Peter has been, and he's made wine in a lot of places, he has gone ahead of the rest. His study of yeast in Bordeaux has started a whole new department of the university, because he cottoned on to the fact that yeasts have characters as much as vineyards do. He's now making fabulous wine in Sicily of all places. You must read his book. If wine is your thing, Academy du Vin have published his book, which is called Viking in the Vineyard. So this is, I mean, he has influenced his nephew, Peter, enormously. Peter came to Bordeaux and learned about winemaking before Peter was rather master.
I did, and so which quite neatly takes us on to the last line, because if I'm not altogether mistaken, Peter Vinding, uncle, so moving from the nephew Peter Sisek to Peter Vinding, was instrumental in helping start this last line at the top, I think.
Yeah, as much as mine. Yeah. Because among his other gifts, Peter is a historian. And we were talking about where in the world has great wine been made, which is somehow sunk below the radar. And the most prominent country in that case is Hungary. And most people say, well, Hungary, that's behind the Iron Curtain, there's nothing special. But the fact is that the wines of Tokai in Hungary were the most expensive wines in the world for a couple of hundred years. Then along comes the 1917, the Russian Revolution, the Bolshevik Revolution, the First World War, their entire market, which was Eastern Europe, Russia, and so on, mainly, rose up, no over that. The Soviet system comes in, and it completely screws this great vineyard. So when Peter and I started talking about it, this is immediately after the revolution of 1989. 1990, we said, let's go and see. And we went, and we found that the vineyards were there. There were some wonderful people who had been forced to send their wines to the cooperative cellar to be ruined. And we said, what we've got to do is restart this. So we founded something that we called the Royal Tokai Wine Company. Royal is a bit pretentious, I know, but to catch people's attention. And Hungary used to have kings too. It sweetness, honey in your palate. And then you swallow it and you think, God, I like some more. And that isn't true of most sweet wines. It sort of cleans up your palate, it's fresh and lovely. The acidity does that for you. And so there you are. If this is your first taste of Tokai, it is a good place to start, but you could go from here, steps up, with more and more of the botrytized grapes, which is called Asu in Hungarian, and it gets sweeter and grander and longer lasting in your mouth. It becomes one of the sublime wines. Can you shake it, which is what we say when we describe
Thank you so much, Anne and Margaret. I'm sure we've all really enjoyed everything this evening, and you're probably all absolutely itching to get upstairs and try the wine.
Together to talk about what they're drinking and learning from each other. Please do follow us on Instagram at DrinkWithMeUK. I'm here this evening at the launch of Hugh Johnson's memoirs, The Life and Wines of Hugh Johnson, at the fantastic Vintners Hall in the City of London, which is known to everybody as the spiritual home of the international wine trade. This event is being hosted by the Académie du Vin Library, which was founded by Stephen Spurrier, and it is a fantastic publishing house which is here to promote fine writing at its best, fine wine writing at its best. They publish new editions as well as new editions of. I'm sorry, is this They produce new books, new wine writing books, as well as new editions of old books. Now I'm going to taste 6 wines that Hugh himself has chosen this evening as one of his favourite wines. Let's start off with the fantastic Paul Roger. Interestingly enough, Paul Roger is one of the few champagne houses that is still family owned and run, which means that they take particular care to keep going with their traditions and methods of production. It was founded in 1849 and is now based in Épinay in the fantastic Champagne. This wine is the Brut Reserve, and they started to create the Brut Reserve because they thought this is what the English wanted to have, and isn't it a fantastic wine? Hopefully you may have a bottle at home, or if not, hopefully after this evening you'll be going out to buy them to taste them. So if we just look at this is a perfect combination in exactly the same proportions of the 3 grapes, Chardonnay, Pinot Noir and Pinot Meunier. Of course, the Pinot Noir produces the structure and the body. The Pinot Meunier gives the freshness, and the Chardonnay herself gives the elegance and the finesse that you would expect from a great champagne. So if we just look at the colour, there is a beautiful fine mist, fine bubbles and persistence of it, which is always the mark of a quality wine. It's golden straw. If I just put it down here, it's golden straw coloured, and the nose is very clean, and I'm getting some really nice white stone fruits, including pear and a bit of mango as well. Of course, there is the characteristic note of the brioche from the aging. It's so clean and fresh, this wine, but it has absolutely the notes of the brioche and the caramel from the tasting, as well as light notes of apricot and pears running through it. It's absolutely fantastic wine, and I don't think anybody could ever debate why this is on this table this evening. Moving on, I'm going to take you a little further south than Champagne, and I'm going to take you down to Burgundy. Now this next wine is the Macon Versé from Domaine Leflave, and it's a 2019 vintage. Now this is Domaine Leflave with an S, not without an S. Joseph Leflave also had wines based in the Pouligny-Montrachet area of Burgundy, so I'm sure that you know that there is going to be very high expectation for this wine. But down in the Macon, it actually has a much less expectation from the consumer, but actually this is a blockbuster of a wine. So if I just take it here. Interestingly enough, so Joseph Lefebvre founded Domaine Leflave with without an S, in 1717. And an interesting anecdote about him is that he actually worked on the first French submarine, which has nothing to do with wine, but it shows that he's a great scientist as well. Again, this has been kept in the family from generation to generation, and Anne-Claude Leflave worked on this wine, and she was a fantastic winemaker until her untimely death in 2015. Her nephew Bryce now looks after the vineyards and the holdings. The Leflave family were absolute pioneers in the biodynamic movement in Burgundy. To them, that was so important to let the grape and the terroir speak for itself. There are no chemicals, no insecticides, no pesticides used in these wines. These are all the natural expression of the wine as it should be. Obviously, coming from Burgundy, it's 100% Chardonnay, and it's aged for 16 months in stainless steel tanks, which gives it its absolutely Burgundian taste profile. So again, if we just look at the colour, if you can see that, you see it's more of a green gold, and that would go naturally with the fact that it's a 2019 vintage, so it's still fairly young. On the nose, this has got some serious herbaceous notes happening here. There is a lot of minerality, with some white fruits, so I would say some apples I can smell here, but a lot of flint and stone going through this with a little bit of grass. On the palate, there is a few floral notes, but there's also the very distinctive Burgundian clay soil is coming through with a lot of flint and mineral aspects to it. There is a serious kick of acidity, which you would expect, with a lovely green apple hue. This one's a good one. Moving on to another Chardonnay, I'm going to take you all the way across the ocean now, over to the Napa Valley, which is somewhere I'd love to go. And this is the Haid de Villain Chardonnay from Napa from 2016. And this has quite a romantic story behind it, which I quite like in wine, because wine is all about romance and fun. The Aubert de Villain, who you may know as the co-director of Domaine de la Romanée Conti, he actually married the cousin of Larry Hyde, who owns the Hyde winery in Napa Valley. His cousin was Pamela, and so became a force and a marriage, literally, of the high-bodied, full-bodied Californian Chardonnays, coupled with the elegance of the Burgundian Chardonnays. So this was literally a match made in heaven. Now, interestingly about this is from the Carneros appellation, and this was actually the AVA was only granted to Carneros in 1983, so it's quite a young appellation. And this is one of actually the coolest regions in the Napa Valley, because it's so close to the San Pablo Bay. The cool winds from it come in and really beast through the hot Californian sunshine. So instead of the really heavy oak Chardonnays, which I particularly really like, I must admit, this has actually got a real nice elegance finesse in it, and it's not heavily oaked and it's not heavily fruited. So if we look at this has actually got a deeper colour to the Burgundy, and this is more of a golden straw colour, I would say, and it's, as you can see, it's got a really, really nice deep colour to that. You can really smell the oak on this. In comparison to the Macon wine, you can absolutely detect the oak from the very first nose of this. No, it's delicious. But what it also has is the oak does not overpower the fruit. So I've got in here some really lovely mandarin, some mangoes, and a little bit of peach going through it. It's really delicious on the nose. If you think of California Chardonnays, this is one to watch, but with the finesse of Burgundy. Again, there's a minerality here from the Burgundian principles of winemaking and because of the cooler region in there. But it's also got pears and apples, so it's got a real mix of the fruits that you would expect from a marriage of Burgundy and Napa. I'm going to take you back to France now and back to Bordeaux. Of course, there has to be a Bordeaux here from Hugh. How can there not be? So this is actually not one of the Grand Crus and not one of the huge wines of Bordeaux, but this is actually from the Côte de Bourg, which is on the right bank of the Gironde, so Merlot's dominating here. And this is the Roc de Caen from the great François Michravy, and this is the 2014 vintage. Now, you may recognize François Michravy's name because he is very, very well known for the Grand Cru in Saint-Emilion of the Tetre Rochebeuf. But this one, what he wanted to do was find a smaller, more lesser known region and to coax out the potential of what the grapes had to offer in that region. Bordeaux is a fantastic region for wine, and he wanted to find out other places where he could find and create masterpieces, and he absolutely has done here. This, the Roc de Cannes, is actually, the vines are planted on the most highly reputed slope of the whole of the Côte de Bourg, which is called Les Croutes. And so what that does is, because it's surrounded by the Gironde as well, there's a natural amphitheatre of the vines. So what happens is, the cool breeze from the Gironde is actually sort of fought against by the heat that comes down on the slopes to create the perfect ripening conditions for the Merlot. Now this wine is 70% Merlot, 20% Cabernet Sauvignon, and I think we'll be able to detect the Cabernet Sauvignon in this, and the rest is Malbec for seasoning. So if we look at this colour, if you can see it here, it's got a really lovely deep purple colour, but with a nice cherry rim to it, if you can just see it there. It's a really beautiful colour there. That's claret at its finest, I would say. And let's have a look. Okay, so even though it's Merlot dominated, you can smell the spice on this from the Cabernet Sauvignon. There are delicious notes of black currants, dried strawberry fruits that you can buy, and also a little bit of the mocha, which I think is the Cab Sauv coming through. The tannins on here are quite light actually, and they are not overpowering the wine itself, and there is a great acidity cutting through all of this, which is because of the cool breezes from the Gironde. I would say this has a lot of, excuse me, one more sip. There's a lot of stewed red fruits in here with a real hint of black pepper and spice, which is a really delicious wine. The classic Bordeaux, I would say. Moving on, and I'm going to take you just next door now. We're staying in Europe for the rest of this trip, and I'm taking you to the Ribera del Duero for the PSI Bodegas y Viñedos Almado 2018 from the great Peter Sisek. You may know great Peter Sisek from his work with the Dominio de Pingus wines, for which he's really famous for. But this wine he's done, and it's a fantastic expression of Tempranillo. The Ribera del Duero is a really important wine region in the Castilla y León in the North Spain. And all the vineyards are planted along 70 miles of the River del Duero, which is really lovely. So it gets all the breezes from the river, which cools down the grapes, which is perfect for Tempranillo, which is this wine, because it's a very thick-skinned grape, and of course it ripens early, so it doesn't eradicate from any of the flavours of the grape. This was granted its DO status in 1982, and what Peter has done here, he works with his winemaker Pablo Rubio, and what he wants to do is essentially give back to Ribera del Duero. He lives there, and what he does is this is a very complicated wine to create. He actually takes wines and grapes from all over the Ribera del Duero, and he meticulously looks at them and checks that these are the ones he wants to create this wine. So this wine is made from 86% Tempranillo, or Tente Fino, which is what it's called in Spain. And then it's Grenache, 12%, and then a little bit of others just for good seasoning. And if we just look at the colour here in comparison to the Bordeaux, it's it's a much darker colour because that is the thick skin of the Tempranillo. So it's a more ruby colour, more ruby purple colour. And if I just nose it, this is a lot lighter on the nose than the typical Bordeaux that I just tasted. There's really light red fruits on here, really, really nice raspberries, and a little bit of a floral note as well I'm getting, which is really nice, and you can smell a little bit of the oak as well. On the palate, the tannins are a bit heavier on this one because the Tempranillo is a much thicker skinned grape, which you would expect. But you can't taste the oak so much. This is not so heavy on that, and the acidity is a lot more balanced with the tannins, which is fantastic. I would say this has a little bit of spice in it, whereas along with the red fruit, so it gives us a really complex wine, really delicious. I hope you're enjoying these at home along with me at the moment. And then finally, and last but certainly not least, is the brainchild of Hugh himself, and I've actually had the privilege of visiting this winery, so I'm going to wax lyrical about it for a few minutes now. So this is the Royal Tokai, and this is the Blue Label 5 Petunias from 2017, and there is nowhere in the world, I'm sure all of us have been to vineyards, which is why we're tuning into Hugh's talk this evening. There is nowhere in the world I've been like this. To sit Essentia down in the cellars beneath the vineyards is like no experience I've ever had before and probably will not have again. So the wine of king and the king of wines. If we just look at the colour, just even before I even start talking about it, the colour is just something, just pure gold, isn't it? It's like liquid gold looking at. This was established in 1990 by Hugh and 60 vineyard owners who wanted to resurrect the crown in Hungary's, the jewel in Hungary's crown, should I say. And he wanted to resurrect the finest wine, one of the finest wines in the world, Tokai. For so long, it's been so under the radar, and now it's time for it to come and shine with all the other dessert wines in the world. So now it's done so well, it's actually exported to over 30 countries now. The vineyards of Royal Tokai are based 220 kilometers away from Budapest, and they are mainly based in the Mad region. They're all from first growths, which are the highest growths you could have. And what happens is the vineyards of the Royal Tokai particularly are placed at the confluence of two rivers. And what that means is that it is the perfect conditions for creating the noble rot, which is the azu, which creates the most wonderful drink, this. So what happens is we've got the mist from the rivers will come up and shrivel the grapes, and that will completely concentrate the intensity of the flavour and the acidity in the grapes. And then it's left to dry out, so it's completely left intact. Each grape is picked by hand. It's not bunches of grapes picked, it's each berry picked by hand. And the reason why it's called petunias is because the berries are put into 27-litre pots called potonus, and that's where it comes from. And the petunias on the label is the number of the petunias which are added to the grape must to make the Tokai. So this one is, in this particular instance, is 5. But if I tell you it takes 5 kilograms of the azu berries to make 1 kilogram of the azu wine that we need, you can see how labour intensive and how difficult it is to make this wine. But that's why it's such a fantastic wine. So again, the colour is like liquid gold. I mean, you don't even have to even speak about it so much. This is quite a large portion for me, but thank you very much whoever poured this. I won't be giving this one back this evening. On the nose, it's just apricots and honey. That's all I have. Apricots and honey. It's just absolutely phenomenal. There's just nowhere else, nothing else to describe it. And on the palate, there is a lot of apricots again, honey, but here we have massive burst of acidity because of the berries. So it absolutely cuts through the sweetness, and it means that you are not just overpowered with just sugar and feel like you've just had 6 cans of Coke. Not at all. This is absolutely beautiful wine, made for cheese, made for food, and also just made for yourself. Obviously, it's made just exclusively from the ferment grape, which they also do base wine, still wines from now. But this is the king. This is the jewel in the crown. And on that note, I'll be taking this and enjoying it. Cheers.